this evening I just wanted to talk about Suzuki as an introduction. I don't know, we all saw the film on Suzuki, or not, we didn't all see the film, but it actually changed a lot for me seeing that film on Suzuki, about my feelings about him, because Suzuki was, for people my age, people who kind of came to Buddhism in the 60s or 70s, Suzuki was the man, Virtually every book on Zen was published by Ryder, who turned out to be my publishers, but coincidentally later. Ryder published all Suzuki's books. And a lot of English Buddhism and Western Buddhism was kind of predicated on Suzuki, but Suzuki got a lot of criticism in Japan. They claimed he was too kind of intellectual or academic, and he never... he was a wonderful scholar, but he was always incredibly natural, and I think that's what's really attracted me about him. And I just wanted to and in a way it ties in, I guess that's why I'm attracted to him, in what interests me. And in his early and midlife, he was an incredibly well-read scholar. I mean, he was in the 30s, 20s, Japanese man who knew all about Western philosophy and spoke fluent English and could talk with Western scholars about Western ideas, and had an intrinsic knowledge of Zen, a pragmatic, practical knowledge. And he's differently than I, not that I in any way put myself anywhere close to him, but his great thing was prajna wisdom. His great thing early on in his teaching was about the expression of wisdom that came out of a direct experience of a sense of unity or loss of the small self. But later in his life, and certainly in the whole way that he was, his conduct, his nature, the way people responded to him, his great emphasis then became compassion, or the correct word is karuna, is compassion. And he for me personified this idea which we talk about in Zen. We talk about mushin, or no mind, and it sounds rather esoteric, mushin, no mind. And I'll go on to talk a little about no mind. But no mind simply means, for me anyway, and I think manifested in Suzuki, is an unself consciousness. So there's a lack of self present in the way that you are, an unself consciousness. And I don't know if I'm sure we've all had this experience of not being self-conscious, and what a joy it is, like childlike. Is that right? When you just kind of in the world, and you're not worried about what you look like or what people think of you, that's unself-conscious. That for me is mushin. But this is what Suzuki says. Man is a thinking greed, but his great work is done when he is not calculating and thinking. Childlikeness has to be restored with long years of training in the art of self-forgetfulness. When this is attained, man thinks, yet he does not think. He thinks like showers coming down from the sky. He thinks like the waves rolling on the ocean. He thinks like the stars illuminating the heavens. He thinks like the green foliage shooting forth in the relaxing spring breeze. Indeed, he is the showers, the ocean, the stars, and the foliage. So Suzuki, in this piece, seems to me to be saying that when we do forget ourselves, exactly as Dogen said, that we become, what's the last line? Anybody remember? When we forget ourselves.
To be enlightened by the 10,000 things, and we're trace of enlightenment.
We are enlightened by the 10,000 things. Yeah, we're enlightened by the shower, by the ocean, by the stars, by the foliage. We don't feel any separation from them. I guess that's the enlightenment. And so, at a personal level, what I'm interested in this is that often in this practice, and particularly in the Zen practice, because particularly from the perspective of perhaps a more strict moral precept-driven practice, Zen is often the ethical foundation of Zen, I think, perhaps is questioned. Particularly because there's a lot of stories about Zen antics and the crazy things that Zen teachers do. And perhaps more recently because quite a few American teachers have been involved with their students, So the question of ethics is kind of looms. But finally, for me, the ethic, the ethics are expressed in an ordinary, everyday way of, how do we lead our life in the precepts that we receive when we do Jukai. But that is founded on the very basic ethical essence, if you like, of this practice, is the belief that in emptiness, that there is no single absolute thing, that we and everything else is an outcome of cause and effect, and that cause and effect necessarily relates us all of us, and everything out there as interdependent. And if that's a digestive biscuit, by the way, not a peanut one this time. So this interdependence in itself is an ethical position, because if you really, even if you only pay lip service to it, you don't actually feel it intrinsically, but you do think, well, that would be a nice way to live. Then that will colour everything that you do, I imagine. Because if you feel a connection with everybody and everything, then clearly your way of being in the world is going to be less self-orientated and more orientated toward the greater well-being. I think that would just arises naturally. And so I just underlined a couple of quotes that I like about samsara. Samsara is ignorance of this, and thus the tendency to create duality all the time. That's samsara, and out of that duality we suffer. And the other thing about samsara, or ignorance if you like, is that often we don't recognise, or because we are self-involved, we don't recognise the signals the world's giving us or other people are giving us. And I don't know about you, but I've done it as often, is that we keep repeating the same pattern, even though we know it doesn't work. we repeat the same pattern. It's funny, but we determined in a way that, that this, I will make this pattern work, and it doesn't. It refuses to work. So one outcome of this ignorance, of ignorance, is being caught up in our own world and being unavailable to hear, what the rest of the world is telling us. So this person, who wrote this article, goes on to say that Nirvana, we think of Nirvana as a sunny, a happy place where everything's wonderful. I think it's even in popular press and popular understanding, Nirvana is some kind of heavenly place. Is that right? It is, isn't it? Nirvana. People talk about Nirvana. And this person says, a more precise interpretation of Nirvana, and actually I don't agree with him, it's a more precise, this seems a broader interpretation of Nirvana, is the adoption of a broad perspective that admits all experiences, pleasurable or painful, as aspects of awareness. So Nirvana is our willingness to embrace the good and the bad, or the painful and the pleasurable, all as part and parcel of our awareness, and not trying to reject some of them, the ones we don't like, and encourage the ones we do like. So the basic frame of mind in Nirvana is one in which there isn't judgment. And the basic frame of mind in samsara is one in which there is judgment. That's a quite simple way for me to see it and feel it. And how do you cultivate this compassion? How do you cultivate it? Can you cultivate it? I don't know. Does anybody got any view on that? Can you pretend as if? Is it possible to cultivate compassion?
I think it is, Sensei. I think starting with yourself.
Starting with the self, yeah.
For me,
good point. Yeah, great.
When I own up to my own faults and errors and follies, it makes it much easier to accept that in other people.
Yeah.
I'm not standing on the high ground, I'm down in the mud.
Yeah.
And so for me, that starting there is...
Okay. So to cultivate compassion, I'm saying this for the mic in case it didn't pick you up. You begin by cultivating compassion for yourself.
Yes, and self-knowledge.
And self-knowledge. Okay.
I think that for me it comes out of self-knowledge.
Yeah.
Really facing up to how I am, not how I think I am.
So do you think if you grow in self-awareness and self-knowledge, that then allows you to be more forgiving of other folk? Is that?
Yes.
I got you. Yeah. Because you understand their motives.
Yeah.
And their motives normally come out of a vulnerability or a fear rather than...
As does my own.
As do your own, yeah. What do you think? What do you think of Andy's take?
It's interesting the approach that some of the other traditions take towards cultivating compassion. Some of the other traditions, for example Tibetan Buddhism or even Theravada, do specific meditations, don't to cultivate that kind of emotional connection and compassion, and with the idea then that flows into your life. But we don't do that, and yet that still seems to be a natural side effect almost of Zazen.
Yeah, I wanted to say that about Zazen in a little while. Yeah, and the Tibetans they do visualizations of people who are patently compassionate, don't they? So they visualize being them. Yeah.
There's Tonglen practice.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's sometimes called metta as well. I don't know if they do metta.
Yeah, I think just the difference between Tibetan and Theravada. Same thing.
That's useful.
Practice. Yeah.
Especially, if you're struggling with someone.
Are you what? Struggling with somebody, to send them well-being, despite your wanting to strangle them. Look, Suzuki says, man is a thinking reed, but his general work is done when he is not calculating and thinking. And that really ties in with what we talked about the other, as it Dogen says, think about not thinking. How do you think about not thinking? So, as Alan just said, one of the natural outcomes of Zazen seems to be, does seem to be a natural outflow, if you like, of kindness. Let's call compassion kindness. And I've seen that pragmatically on many, many retreats. And I don't really understand it, except the fact that maybe everybody's getting in touch with a part of themselves which is in all of us, but which is hidden. But that is not don't let's get into the trap of thinking that when we do Zazen, we won't think. Because, you know, we talked about it a few weeks ago, but I think it's really worth emphasizing that the function of the mind is to think, and it will think. And if you try and suppress it from thinking, that's just another act of self-will. You know, you believe, in some way there's already a separation. If you think you can stop your thinking. Because who's doing the thinking and who's doing the stopping? So it implies that you have more power than you have. You know, you can't stop thinking. But what you can do is to allow, what's it say here? Resting the mind in its natural state is very different from trying to stop thoughts altogether. Buddhist meditation does not in any way involve attempting to make the mind a blank. There's no way to achieve thoughtless meditation. Even if you could, you would probably become zombie-like. There's always a few zombies in the Zen though, you know. That's just because you've gone to sleep probably. So yeah, so the essence of meditation is just a bare awareness to what's coming up. And sometimes nothing comes up. And that's okay. You don't have to induce it to come up, you know. You can be mindless. You can't, there does arise that you can be mindless, as it will, thoughtless, but it arises naturally. I'm not sure. Often in the morning for me it arises, and I'm just, the bell goes and I thought, where did that 45 minutes go? I wasn't even there.
I'll just ask Sensei, the D.T.Suzuki film, I really liked it as well because it gave you a very clear image of the man. Yeah. As not just a scholar, but as a family man, as an individual, didn't it? In a way that it was a bit dry before. But I wonder what you thought about, the traditional criticism of him from decades ago was that he had a sort of Enlightenment fixation. Yeah. What do you make of that? Well,
the whole reason, in a way, you've hit the nail on the head. The whole reason I was initiated to talk in this way, because I was affirmed or did feel comforted by the fact that what he came to later in life was the importance of compassion. And for me, that seems to me, I mean, there would be people that would argue that couldn't arise without a kind of unitive experience. But it certainly isn't my experience that is the case. And so his kind of fixation, and I don't think, I think it was unfair to say it was a fixation, but I think it was a question of degree for him, the degree of an authenticity, if you like, in the practice was that you'd had this experience. But maybe it's a lack in me or my own experience, but what I see and what I've experienced is that there are degrees there are various ways of opening, you know, there are various degrees of opening. There can be huge openings, there can be small openings. A small opening for one person could completely change their life. A big opening for another person might just reinforce them in their narcissism, you know. So I don't take any particular perspective on the importance or otherwise. For me, the emphasis in this practice is about, and you know, it's very nice. This feels like it's all segged very well this evening. You know, Andy put his finger on it. This whole thing is about initially is about relieving our own suffering. But in the doing of that, what seems to then follow on is that we want also to help Joe Bloggs down the road who's having a tough time. Because you can perhaps see a bit better than he or she can, because you're a third party and you've been down the road yourself, a bit wider stuff. So it's thank you, John. That was the whole reason for the talk. I didn't prime him, I promise
you. As you just saying that's thing about being compassionate to the person down the road or the person opposite, that prajna wisdom, that insight that sees him or her as you, as identical in suffering, is sort of would just naturally seem to generate compassion, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it does. I think it does. Yeah.
Once there's that realization that you're not actually separate.
Yeah. And also, one of the other definitions of ignorance is not to acknowledge the incredible power each of us have. The mind that each of us has amazing power. And ignorance is not to see that. Because what struck me that though was then, as you were talking about, you would act naturally. There was recently a story of two women that lifted up a 2-ton car because a child was underneath. They just went and they just did it, Huge power. We all have potential. I think we've all got much more potential and much more power than we give our. We limit ourselves.
Yeah.
I think we definitely limit ourselves, and that out of fear as well, fear of judgment and criticism and all those things.
Is it true as well that the Buddhist kind of insight into compassion arose when he was fished out of the river by a young girl who was passing.
Tell us,
when he fell in the river or he was about to die, he was at that far point of eating one grain of rice, or maybe, was at death's door and fell into the river in one story. And the passing milkmaid, as the story goes, noticed this pile of rags in the river and just automatically went and fished him out. And I'm probably telling it completely wrongly,
That's
but
okay.
his insight was that why that? Why would she do that? Because it's something that naturally arose.
And I'm thinking, why did she give me that fantastic rice pudding with cinnamon on the top? As he pulled her out, as she pulled him out. That was. I don't know what she gave him, but I'm sure it was something like that. Okay. I imagine half of you are itching to see the second half of the World Cup, so I'll give you a break.